I always believed that family was supposed to have your back. No matter what happened, no matter how bad things got, I thought my sister and I would always support each other. But I was wrong. Because when it really mattered, when I was the happiest I had ever been, she was the one who took it all away from me. And the worst part? She did it with a smile on her face, as if she was doing me a favor. But life has a funny way of setting things right, and years later, when she needed someone to stand by her, she found herself completely alone. The very thing she did to me came back to her, and this time, there was no one left to save her. Sarah and I grew up as complete opposites. She was the older, more outgoing sister, always the center of attention while I was quieter, more reserved. She had a way of making people like her instantly. It didn't matter where we were, family gatherings, school, even random places like a grocery store, people just gravitated toward her. I admired her for it. I thought she had this special charm, something I could never have. But what I didn't realize was that she didn't just want to be liked. She wanted to be the best. She wanted to be the one that everyone talked about, the one who had it all. And when I finally had someone, who made me happy, she couldn't stand it. Michael was the kind of person who made life feel easy. He was kind, patient, and always knew how to make me laugh. He wasn't flashy or overly confident like the guys Sarah usually dated, but he was real. He cared about me in a way no one else ever had. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had something truly my own. Sarah pretended to be happy for me. She smiled when I talked about him, acted excited when I showed her pictures, and even told me how lucky I was to have found someone like him. But I should have known better. Because behind that smile, behind those fake words of encouragement, she was planning something else entirely. It started small, little things that didn't seem like much at first. She would ask innocent questions like, "Are you sure he's really that into you?" Or, "I saw him talking to some girl at the store. Do you know who she is?" At first, I brushed it off. I trusted Michael, and I didn't think much of it. But then she started telling me things that made me doubt everything. "I heard he used to be a player," she said one night, sipping her wine like it was just casual gossip. "Guys like that don't just change overnight." Then she got more direct. "I don't want to say anything, but someone told me they saw him at a bar last weekend, without you." The way she spoke, the way she acted like she was just looking out for me, made it easy to believe her. She knew exactly how to get under my skin, how to plant doubts so deep that they started growing on their own. And before I knew it, I started pulling away from Michael. The night everything fell apart, Sarah made sure she had front row seats. She told me she had seen something I wouldn't be able to ignore. "I didn't want to tell you," she said, faking sympathy. "But I saw Michael with another girl. They were getting pretty close." My heart pounded as she showed me a picture on her phone. It was blurry, taken from a distance, but it looked like him. My head spun, and the anger, the betrayal, it was too much. I confronted Michael that night, and when he denied it, I didn't believe him. I yelled. I accused. And in the end, I walked away. He was devastated. He kept trying to explain, but I had already made up my mind. And standing there, watching me destroy my own relationship, was Sarah. She didn't say much, just hugged me and whispered, "You deserve better." Months later, I found out the truth. Michael never cheated. The girl in the picture was his cousin. And the person who had started the rumor? Sarah. She had manipulated everything, twisted words, planted doubts, and in the end, she had gotten exactly what she wanted. Michael was out of my life. And for what? Just so she could be the one on top again. I was heartbroken. But more than that, I was angry. I confronted her, but she just laughed it off. "I was just trying to protect you," she said, as if she actually believed it. But I knew the truth. She didn't want to protect me. She wanted to take what was mine. From that moment on, I kept my distance. I focused on myself, on rebuilding my life. And I promised myself that I would never let her get that close to me again. Years passed, and Sarah moved on to her own perfect life. She married Ethan, a rich, charming businessman who adored her. She had the big house, the fancy cars, the dream life she always wanted. Every time I saw her, she made sure to remind me of it. "You'll find someone too," she would say with fake concern, as if my life was empty without a husband. But I didn't need one. I was happy on my own. I had built a life that I was proud of, one that wasn't based on lies and manipulation. And then, one day, everything changed. At a family dinner, someone casually mentioned it. "Did you hear? Ethan left Sarah." The words hung in the air, and for the first time in years, Sarah didn't look like the confident, untouchable person she always pretended to be. She looked small, weak, alone. I didn't react, but inside, I felt something I never expected. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't satisfaction. It was recognition. She had finally felt what I felt. The betrayal, the loneliness, the emptiness of realizing that the person you trusted the most had turned against you. And the irony? The very things she had done to me, doubts, manipulation, lies, were the same things that had destroyed her own marriage. Later that night, she came up to me, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. "You must be happy now," she said bitterly, "seeing me like this." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the sister who had always been one step ahead, always pulling the strings. I saw someone who had finally run out of moves. "No," I said calmly, "I'm not happy, but I do think it's funny how life works." She flinched, but she didn't argue. She couldn't. She knew the truth just as well as I did. I walked away that night knowing that I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to gloat or rub it in her face, because karma had already done all the work for me. And the best part? This time I was free. Free from her games, her manipulation, her need to control everything. And as I left, I realized something. I had never really lost anything. Not Michael. Not my happiness. Because in the end, I had gained something even more valuable. Peace. And that was something Sarah would never have. The days after that dinner felt strangely quiet. For years, Sarah had always been a constant presence in my life, whether I wanted her there or not. She was always the one steering conversations, making sure she was the center of attention, playing the role of the successful, adored wife. But now, she had nothing to brag about. No grand vacations, no romantic gestures from Ethan, no carefully curated moments to post on social media. Just silence. And in that silence, I could tell she was unraveling. I heard bits and pieces from family members. My aunt mentioned that Sarah had tried reaching out to Ethan, begging him to reconsider. Apparently, he had moved out weeks before anyone even knew, and she had been trying to cover it up, pretending everything was fine. But he wasn't answering her calls anymore. My cousin told me she had been crying in the middle of a restaurant, shouting at a friend who had dared to say, "Maybe it's for the best." Sarah was losing control, and for the first time, there was no one left to clean up her mess. She had spent so much time pushing people away, manipulating them, using them for her own benefit, that when she finally needed someone, there was no one left to stand by her. Then one night, I got a message from her. Short, simple, just one word. "Hey." I stared at my phone for a long time. A year ago, 5 years ago, I would have answered immediately. I would have given her the benefit of the doubt, thinking that maybe, just maybe, she wanted to make things right. But I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't the naive little sister who believed every word she said, who let her twist my life however she pleased. I had spent too long healing from what she did to me. I wasn't going to let her back in just because now she was the one who needed comfort. Still, part of me was curious. Maybe it was human nature. Maybe it was the part of me that still remembered the good moments we shared before everything fell apart. So I responded, "What do you want, Sarah?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. I could imagine her sitting in her perfectly decorated but now painfully empty house, trying to find the right words. And when the message finally came through, it wasn't an apology. It wasn't regret. It was just another attempt to make herself the victim. "I just don't understand why this is happening to me." I let out a breath, shaking my head. Of course. Even now, even after everything, she still saw herself as the one who had been wronged. She wasn't asking how I was doing. She wasn't acknowledging what she had done to me. She just wanted someone to tell her that none of this was her fault, that Ethan was the bad guy, that she didn't deserve this, that she was still the Sarah who could do no wrong. I could have ignored her. I could have blocked her. But instead, I did something I had never done before. I told her the truth. You don't understand? Maybe you should think about how you treated people, how you lied, manipulated, destroyed things that weren't yours just because you wanted control. Maybe this is happening because, for once, you can't fake your way out of it. I hit send before I could change my mind. She read it instantly, but no reply came. And that was it. That was the last time we spoke. A few weeks later, I heard she had moved out of the city. Some said she was trying to start over somewhere new, where people didn't know about the mess she had made. Others said she was chasing after some new opportunity, another quick fix to make herself feel powerful again. But I didn't care. Her story, her problems, they weren't my burden anymore. I thought back to Michael sometimes. The life we could have had if Sarah had never interfered. The pain she caused, the trust she shattered. But strangely, I didn't feel bitter anymore. Because I had something Sarah never would. Peace. Real, lasting peace. And that more than anything was the kind of justice she could never take away from me. Months passed, and Sarah became nothing more than a name that occasionally popped up in conversations. She had disappeared from family events, stopped posting online, and avoided anyone who knew too much about her downfall. Some people still pitied her, whispering about how hard it must be to lose everything: her husband, her lifestyle, her sense of importance. But I didn't pity her. Not because I was cruel, but because I knew that she had built her entire life on deception. And eventually, lies always catch up to you. One afternoon, I got an unexpected call from my mother. She sounded hesitant, the way she always did when she was about to ask me for something I wouldn't like. "Emma, I think you should talk to your sister." I almost laughed. After all this time, now she wanted me to talk to Sarah? "Why?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "She's not doing well. She called me last night crying. She's struggling, Emma. She doesn't have anyone left." I let out a slow breath, gripping my phone a little tighter. My mother had always had a soft spot for Sarah. No matter what she did, no matter how many times she hurt people, she always found a way to make herself look like the victim, and my mother always fell for it. But I wasn't my mother. I wasn't going to fall into that trap again. "Mom, I get that you feel bad for her, but she did this to herself. She made her choices. And now she has to live with them." My mother sighed. I could hear the conflict in her voice. "I know she hurt you, but she's still your sister." That word didn't mean much to me anymore. Sister. It was supposed to mean loyalty, trust, someone who stood by you no matter what. But Sarah had never been that. She had seen my happiness as a threat, my success as something to compete with. And when she couldn't control me, she destroyed what I had. That wasn't what family was supposed to do. I forgave her a long time ago, I admitted, and I realized it was true. I had let go of the anger, the resentment. I had moved on. But that didn't mean I had to let her back into my life. But that doesn't mean I want her in my life again. My mother was quiet for a long moment before she finally spoke. "I just don't want you to have regrets, Emma. One day you might wish you had reached out." I thought about that for a while after we hung up. Would I regret not talking to Sarah? Would I feel guilty if I never saw her again? But the truth was, I had already made my peace with everything. I didn't need an apology from her. I didn't need closure, because I had already given that to myself. A few weeks later, I heard through the grapevine that Sarah had tried to move to another city for a fresh start, but things didn't work out the way she had hoped. She wasn't the charming, irresistible person she used to be. People saw through her now. Without her beauty, without her connections, without the lifestyle she had once flaunted. She had nothing left to offer. And for the first time in her life, she was truly alone. I never answered her messages, never called her back, and eventually, she stopped trying. Some people might think that's cruel, that I should have given her another chance, reached out, tried to mend things, but I knew better. I knew that if I let her back in, she would do the same thing all over again. She would find a way to twist the truth, to make herself look innocent, to turn my life upside down like she had before. So I chose myself instead. I chose peace. I chose to walk away from the past and into a future where I was free. And that, more than anything, was the best decision I had ever made. A year passed, and Sarah became nothing more than a distant memory. Life had moved on, and so had I. I focused on building a life that wasn't defined by betrayal or past wounds. My career was thriving, my friendships were stronger than ever, and I had learned to truly enjoy my own company. There were days when I didn't even think about Sarah, and that, in itself, was proof of how far I had come. Then, one evening, out of nowhere, I saw her. I was at a small cafe downtown waiting for a friend when I noticed a woman sitting alone in the corner. She looked different, thinner, tired, her once perfect hair tied up in a messy bun. There was no confidence in the way she held herself, no attention-seeking energy that used to make people notice her the moment she walked into a room. It took me a second to even realize it was Sarah. She hadn't seen me, and for a moment I considered leaving. But something in me hesitated. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was a strange sense of finality. Before I could stop myself, I walked over to her table. She looked up, and for the first time in my life, I saw genuine shock on her face. She blinked as if she wasn't sure I was real. "Emma." Her voice was quieter than I remembered. We stared at each other for a long moment before she let out a nervous laugh. "Wow, it's been a long time." I nodded, my expression unreadable. "Yeah, it has." She gestured awkwardly to the chair across from her, and before I even thought about it, I sat down. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe some fake apology, maybe an attempt to justify what she had done. But she didn't say anything at first. Instead, she just looked down at her coffee, stirring it absent-mindedly. "So, how have you been?" she asked after a while, like she was talking to an old co-worker, not the sister she had betrayed. "Good," I said simply. And it was the truth. She nodded, but I could tell she was uncomfortable. She wasn't used to this version of me, the one who wasn't falling over herself to fix things, to make the conversation easier. She was used to the little sister who always let her take control. But that person didn't exist anymore. "Listen," she finally said, her voice hesitant. "I know I wasn't the best sister. I know I made mistakes." I raised an eyebrow. That was putting it lightly. She sighed, shaking her head. "I don't know. I don't expect you to forgive me. I guess I wanted to say I'm sorry." I studied her for a moment. She wasn't crying. She wasn't trying to manipulate me with dramatic words or excuses. And for the first time, I wondered if she truly meant it. But the thing was, it didn't change anything. "I forgave you a long time ago, Sarah," I told her, and she looked up, surprised. "Not for you, but for me." She swallowed, nodding slowly. "I guess that's fair." There was another long silence between us. "Are you happy?" she finally asked. I thought about it for a moment, and then I smiled. "Yeah, I am." She exhaled, looking down again. "That's good." And just like that, I knew our conversation was over. There was nothing more to say. No grand reconciliation, no dramatic confrontation. Just two people who had once been sisters, now little more than strangers. I stood up, giving her one last look. "Take care of yourself, Sarah." She didn't say anything, just nodded. As I walked out of the cafe and back into my life, I felt no anger, no sadness, no regret. Just peace. And that was all I ever really needed. Months passed after that brief encounter, and Sarah never reached out again. And honestly, I didn't expect her to. That cafe meeting felt like the final page of a book that had been left unfinished for too long. Whatever she had wanted from me, closure, forgiveness, maybe even a sliver of our old bond, it didn't matter anymore. Life had already given me all the closure I needed. For the first time in years, I felt completely free. There was no lingering bitterness, no thoughts of what could have been. I had moved forward, and it felt good knowing that I had done so without needing revenge, without wasting my energy on someone who had spent years tearing me down. I had won, not in a dramatic, triumphant way, but in the quiet kind of victory that comes when you truly let go of the past. One day, as I was walking through the park, enjoying the crisp autumn air, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Emma?" I turned around, and for a second I couldn't believe it. Standing there, looking just as surprised as I felt, was Michael. He still looked the same, but different. Older, more mature, like life had shaped him in ways that I hadn't been around to see. He smiled, a little uncertain, as if he wasn't sure how I'd react to seeing him. "Wow," I breathed out. "Michael, it's been a long time." He chuckled softly, nodding. "Yeah, it really has." For a moment, neither of us knew what to say. There was so much history between us, so much that had been lost because of Sarah's lies. But standing there, looking at him, I realized something. I didn't feel the guilt or regret I once had. I had spent years blaming myself for believing Sarah, for pushing him away. But now all I felt was calm. Like this was just another part of the story that had finally come full circle. "How have you been?" he asked, his voice warm. "Good," I said honestly. "Really good." He smiled again, and for a second, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Nostalgia, maybe. Or maybe the same realization I was having, that we were both in a better place now, that time had healed wounds neither of us thought could ever fully close. "I actually saw Sarah a while back," I said, watching his expression carefully. His jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't look angry, just resigned. "Yeah? How's she doing?" "Not great," I admitted. "She's lost everything. I think she finally understands what she put us through." Michael let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "I'm not surprised. She was always chasing something, trying to be more, have more. People like that. They burn everything around them until there's nothing left." I nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. "You know," he said after a pause, "for a long time I was angry. Not just at her, but at you too. I kept wondering how you could believe her over me, how you didn't see through what she was doing." He let out a soft laugh, but there was no bitterness in it. "But then I realized it wasn't your fault. She was your sister. You trusted her. That's what made it so easy for her to do what she did." I swallowed, my throat tightening. "I'm sorry, Michael. For everything." He looked at me, really looked at me, and then he smiled. "I forgave you a long time ago." I felt something in my chest loosen, something I didn't even realize I had still been holding on to. "You look happy," he said, studying me. "I'm glad." "I am," I replied, smiling back. "And you?" He nodded. "Yeah, life's been good to me." We stood there for a moment, the weight of the past finally settling, no longer a burden, just something we had both lived through. "Maybe we could catch up sometime," he said cautiously, almost as if he was testing the waters. I thought about it for a second. Not because I was unsure, but because, for the first time, I had the power to decide for myself, without Sarah's influence, without any outside pressure. And the answer was simple. "I'd like that," I said. And just like that, the past no longer felt like something I had to run from. It was just a part of my story, one that had led me right to where I was always meant to be. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened, not just with Sarah, but with Michael, with my family, with the person I used to be. For so long I had carried the weight of that betrayal, the hurt of losing something I thought was real. But now, for the first time in years, I felt light, like I had finally put everything where it belonged, in the past. Sarah had faded from my life completely. There were no more messages, no more desperate attempts to pull me back into her world. Maybe she finally understood that I wasn't the same person anymore, or maybe she was simply too busy dealing with the consequences of her own actions. Either way, she was gone, and I felt no desire to chase after her. Michael and I met for coffee one afternoon. It wasn't a date. It wasn't some grand romantic reunion. It was just two people catching up, sharing stories of where life had taken them. There was no pressure, no expectations, just warmth and familiarity. And that was enough. For now, at least. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry at Sarah anymore. I wasn't even sad about what had happened. Because without her betrayal, I never would have learned what real peace felt like. I never would have understood the strength it took to walk away from toxic relationships, to stand up for myself, to choose my own happiness over someone else's validation. I had spent so much of my life letting Sarah dictate my choices, my emotions, my self-worth. But now I was free. Free from her manipulation, free from the need to prove anything to her, free from the idea that I had to fix what she had broken. She had spent her whole life trying to be on top, trying to control everything around her. And where had it left her? Alone. I, on the other hand, had finally found what I was looking for. Not in revenge, not in proving her wrong, but in simply letting go. As the sky darkened and the stars began to appear, I took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air against my skin. I had won. Not in the way Sarah would have wanted, not in a way that required gloating or rubbing it in her face. I had won because I was happy, because I had a life I loved, because I had walked away from the past without looking back. And that was the greatest victory of all.